this uncomfortable fact while exaggerating the successes of democratic war-making. Yet, if the moral image of the war is muddied, the material explanation for victory seems unambiguous. Alliance between the British Empire, the Soviet Union, and the United States created overwhelming superiority in manpower and resources. If there is any consensus about why the Allies won, it rests on the unassailable evidence that one side vastly outnumbered and outproduced the other. There is danger here of determinism of a different sort. As one historian of the conflict recently put it, the Allies were certain to defeat Germany once German and Japanese aggression brought them together in December 1941. By 1943, the material gulf was huge. That year, the Axis produced 43,000 aircraft. The Allies produced 151,000. The temptation has always been to assume that the figures speak for themselves. The balance of populations and raw materials greatly favored the Allies. Hence, whatever the Axis powers did, they would always come up against the strategic dead end of material inferiority. This is, at best, an unsophisticated argument. It begs endless questions about the comparative quality of weapons, or the gap between potential and real resources, or about how well weapons were used once the forces actually got them. It also ignores the very considerable efforts made by both sides to deny resources to the other. For example, the submarine offensive against British trade or the Anglo-American bombing of German industry. There was a wide gap between potential and actual output on both sides. The statistics do not simply speak for themselves. They require interpreters. We can see at once that there are no simple answers to the question we started with. Much of what we believe about the war is illusion. Take, for example, the view that the war represented the triumph of democracy over tyranny. In reality, democracy was narrowly confined in 1939 to Britain, France, the United States, and a handful of smaller European and British Commonwealth states, and was even more restricted once the conflict got underway. Far from being a war fought by a democratic world to bring errant dictators to heel, the war was about the very survival of democracy in its besieged heartlands. Victory in 1945 made democracy more secure in Western Europe, America, and the British dominions. But outside these regions, this form of government has had at best a checkered career in the half-century since the defeat of the Axis. If anything, the war made the world safe for communism, which was as embattled as democracy in the 1930s and close to eclipse by 1942. One of the most significant consequences of the war was the spread of communism in Europe and Asia and its consolidation in the Soviet Union. This outcome reflected the significant role played by Soviet forces in defeating Germany. There is now widespread recognition that the decisive theater of operations lay on the Eastern Front. Without Soviet resistance, it's difficult to see how the democratic world would have defeated the new German Empire, except by sitting tight and waiting until atomic weapons had been developed. The great paradox of the Second World War is that democracy was saved by the exertions of communism. This unpalatable fact is usually explained in terms of the common cause against Hitlerism, which helped to bridge the ideological gulf between capitalist democracy and communist authoritarianism. The pooling of resources and military